gospel reading from today in the lectionary is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 16 to 19 and 25 to 30. But to what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another, "We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn." For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, "Look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. At that time Jesus said, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I want to start today with the last part of this reading, this metaphor about taking on Jesus' yoke and what this means. The yoke was and is a familiar symbol of burden-bearing, oppression, subjugation. Yokes were laid on the necks and shoulders of oxen, and also throughout history on prisoners of war and slaves, both during work and as symbols of conquest. Yokes were carried by two oxen, tightly constrained to one another, so that one can't just go off in its own direction, and often a weaker or newer ox would be yoked to a more experienced one so that it could learn that way. But yoke was also used metaphorically in Jesus' time as a rabbinic metaphor for close adherence to Jewish law, that you yoke yourself to the law from the Torah, and as such, behave righteously. Something implied in this biblical metaphor is we can't be unyoked. We can only choose what we are yoked to. Personally, when I hear an invitation to yoke myself to something, it feels a little exhausting just thinking about. But if you think about how we are already yoked, the transformation that we as Christians are invited to takes on a different sense. So what are we yoked to? If a yoke conveys a burden, whether physical or emotional, and something that also guides our behavior, then there are a number of things we might be yoked to in our society and in this time that we're going through right now. On a large scale, there's the unknown surrounding coronavirus and the experiences of people who get it so widely, you don't know what to expect. Generations of inequality and oppression are coming to a head in American society in turmoil and upheaval. And then on a smaller scale, there's money, fears, and the economic downturn, and concerns about scarcity, unrest with being isolated and constantly negotiating our fear with our freedom, along with everyday concerns, caring for the people around us, grieving losses, being busy or stressed or lonely or sad. When we're yoked to the concerns of daily life, the burden makes us heavier and it's hard to carry, and it keeps getting more and more difficult, and we keep getting more and more tired. But when we join our yoke to Jesus, we are redistributing that weight. He doesn't add a burden to our load. He shares what we are already weighed down by. Think of it as Jesus offering to be yoked to us. It doesn't take our load off completely, and the burden doesn't go away, but we know that we're not alone in shouldering it. But because we're yoked to Jesus, our path is also different. Now, last time I preached, I talked about Rent and Doctor Who, and today I'm going to talk about the great theologian Ani DeFranco, who is a folk singer from when I was in college, and continues to be, I'm sure. She has a verse in the song Evolve, that moth outside my kitchen door, she's bonkers for that bare bulb, flying around in circles, bashing in her exoskull. Out in the woods, she navigates fine by the moon, but get her around a light bulb and she's doomed. So today I ask, whither the moth? Let's talk about moths for a minute. Moths are nocturnal, but seem to be drawn to the light. And the reason is they orient themselves by keeping the light source, which until humans started with light bulbs and candles, it was the moon, on one side of themselves, which ensures that they fly in a straight line. That's how they know that they're flying in a straight line in the dark of night. Moths aren't meant to be around light bulbs. They're meant to be around the moon. They need the light. So even if the moon is the light they're supposed to be drawing from, they see the light bulb and think, but this is right here, and look how bright it is. But it isn't real, and it isn't going to satisfy their needs. And it's really, really obvious to us as humans that moths are acting ridiculous, right? Has a moth ever followed a light bulb into your house? Like at night you open the door and a moth sees the light and rushes in, and you're trying to get it out, like turning off the lights, trying to reason with it. Look, the moon is brighter, circle the moon. But by now it's too confused. All of these worries that we yoke ourselves to that take us farther from the will of God because we're trying to solve our own problems. It's like if you're trying to get to a gas station, you're driving down the highway, you're not quite to your exit and you see the gas station over to the right, so you just drive over the barrier and try to navigate through the trees to get directly to it. When you should have just stayed on the road and taken the correct exit and followed the GPS, and it would have ended up getting you there and your path would have been easier. It's not just about, say, getting to financial security. It's about following Jesus. It's doing honest work and helping others, not joining the mob or embezzling, even though that would get you there faster. We'll get there faster if we yoke ourselves directly to money, but we'll also bash in our exoskulls, and that's not the point. How do you think we look to Jesus, trying to chase the easiest solution to our problems, acting from impatience instead of trusting him to center of us? If we rush to what will solve the problem we have right now, we won't get there correctly and possibly not at all. But when we yoke ourselves to Jesus, we can't go off on our own and do whatever we want. We're bound to following his way to get what we need. In the first part of the gospel reading for today, Jesus says, "Wisdom is vindicated by her deeds." This is a parallel to something he said earlier in Matthew, in chapter 7, warning of false prophets, where he said, "A bad tree cannot bear good fruit, and a good tree cannot bear bad fruit." An old neighbor wrote me this week and reminded me of this pear tree that we had when we were growing up in the house I lived for 13 years. I learned so much about fruit trees, how to use fruit from my mother, and we got so many pears from it that each week or two we would give away full grocery paper sacks full of pears to anyone who wanted them. We were not going to eat that many pears. It's not even like lemons or apples or something you use a lot. And my neighbor told us that one time her grandfather came over to ask for a bag of pears, so my mom gave him a bag of pears. And a few days later, he came back with preserves and gave them to my mother. And a few weeks later, that she was talking to my mom mentioned she had no idea who that guy was. All of that to say that if I saw a pear tree that did not have pears on it, there's no way I could tell you for certain it was a pear tree. But if I saw a tree bearing pears, whether it looked familiar or not, I would know for sure it was a pear tree. You can't get pears from any other kind of tree. And Jesus says in Matthew 7, you can't get figs from thistles. It has to be a fig tree. Here at the Ark, we're surrounded by people who've been hurt by church or by Christians at some point in the past, and I have as well. So I hope that if you're listening to this, you're aware that people are looking at you to see what fruit you bear. That's what tells them what path you're on and who you're yoked to. Look at the context in Matthew where Jesus notes that he and John have been rejected even though they were so different. But wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Look at the people John baptized. Look at the miracles Jesus performed. Jesus doesn't tell us what these fruits are to look for, but Paul tells us in Galatians chapter 5 that these are the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You don't get these by flying directly into any light bulb in your path. You don't orient yourself to the light bulb of knowing what the future holds, how long we'll be out of work or working from home, the light bulb of the gas station you want to drive to now, or the money you wish you made. You get these when you know who you're yoked to. You have patience and self-control when you trust God. You have joy and peace when your burden is light, even though you're bearing a burden. And when we yoke ourselves to Jesus, we find joy and patience in knowing we aren't bearing our burdens alone.